Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving into two key factors that elevate supervisor effectiveness and safety outcomes: fairness and familiarity. And we're going to explore some practical strategies that you can take starting today uh, as a leader to boost your own group in those two areas. I've been in your shoes, and so I get distracted when it's all just a one-way conversation. So we're gonna do several polls, as Pam mentioned, and so looking for your opportunities to kind of participate, ask questions, and put in your point of view. Again, my name is Mike Mangan. I'm an executive consultant with Kraus Bell, and let's get started. So, in deference to our new AI overlords, I gave the following prompt to ChatGPT. Imagine you are polling 400 US mid-level leaders and safety professionals. Create a word cloud of their responses to the following prompt, following statement. Think of 1 to 3 words that best describe how frontline supervisors influence the behavior and safety of their people. And this is what ChatGPT came up with. Okay, so a couple of these. But now we're going to we want to see what the humans think. So let's do an open-ended poll. And the prompt is, or the question is, what do you think is the one word that best describes how supervisors influence safety? Now, you could put in 2 words if you like, but you have to smush them together and not have a space in between. Otherwise, it won't be able to read it. So feel free to enter as many times as you like, and go ahead. You should have the prompt come up.
Yes, your prompt may be a pop-up window or it may be in chat. If for any reason you do not get the poll, feel free to type your responses into chat or the Q&A, and I will be happy to enter it from this end.
Walk the talk, a good one. I guess dashes work the same as no space.
Reads as a single word.
Relationship, living, encouragement, I like it. Attitude. If you see a word that resonates with you, but you didn't put it in, feel free to write that again, because then it'll like elevate it in terms of frequency. Strong relationships. Good. So I think we're kind of hitting as many. Another leadership, right? So we're going to talk about a number of these areas as they relate to how you develop or create an environment where there's higher fairness and higher familiarity, or what we call leader-member exchange within the organization. So I like these. These are great.
Tell me when you're ready for me to close it out, Mike.
Yeah, go ahead and close it out, Pam.
Okay.
You guys did better than ChatGPT. Hello. ChatGPT, if you're listening, no offense. I don't want to get in. I have to close that out. Okay. So let's jump right into this. Let's start talking about each of these two facets, and we'll bring in some of those areas into play, the things you mentioned. So first one is fairness, or what we call procedural justice. So the reason it's called procedural justice is when you ask the organizational psychologists who've been researching justice issues at work for the last 40 years, they started first with talking about a concept called distributive justice. Basically, are the outcomes fair? And then they quickly realized that actually what's more important and more valuable, has a bigger impact, is not what outcomes are fair, but is the process used to make the decision fair? And so that's essentially what procedural justice is, our perceptions about the fairness of the process used to make the decision or achieve outcomes. Now, they could have still called it fairness, but these are academics, researchers, so they had to have a fancier name, procedural justice. So we're going to use that one. So think about this. So you're on a team with 6 other people, and your supervisor just got promoted to the manager level. And that now manager is in charge of deciding who among the 6 folks is next going to be get promoted into that supervisor role. And so you're all competing. All 6 of us are competing for that supervisor role. And that manager decides to choose Joe over here because he goes fishing with Joe on the weekends. And you know that Joe's not really that great of a worker, but they're buddies. So how is that going to make you feel? Not just about your motivation to do the work, but also your perceptions of Joe as your new supervisor and your perceptions of your former supervisor who's now the manager. You know that the process by which that decision to who's going to be promoted as supervisor plays a big role in how you view the work. And as we come to find out, also the kinds of things you end up doing or not doing in the job. Well, let's talk about the positive side. What if that manager decides, all right, we're going to let everyone have a chance. Everyone's going to be able to put their hat in the ring if they want, and then we're going to do interviews. We're going to have multiple people involved. Where their interviews are going to be rigorous and difficult, but they're also going to be fair. So you're going to be asked about your accomplishments, the things you've done, your experience, and that's all going to be related. And then when the decision is made, even if it's not me that's promoted, but the person promoted, I've got a lot of respect for, they've done great work, I've had my chance. And so my perceptions of that work environment, because there has been procedural justice, are significantly better and significantly more positive. So how do you get procedural justice? How do you improve this in your organization? Well, there are a couple of things you need to do before the decision is made and a few things afterwards. So let's talk through them. Before the decision, first of all, you got to collect accurate information. You got to understand what's going on, what's the information that's going to help me make this decision. And to the extent that you can, listen to employee concerns. And we're going to come back to that one a little bit later. And then the other piece is make decisions in an unbiased manner. Of course, that's mom and apple pie. But really what we're talking about, we all have a pretty good sense. If you've been in the work world for a while, you have a pretty good sense when a decision is in the best interest of that supervisor or manager to make that decision or the best interest of the team and the organization. We have a pretty good sense that they made a decision that's just more favorable to them. It's kind of it helps them out versus helps the team or the organization. So you want to drive toward the ones that are more unbiased, and in other words, helping the team and the organization. But then after the decision is made, there are a few things you need to do as well. One is clarify the decision. What's the rationale, the why? We have a great human desire for the why, to understand why things happened. And then if it's a decision that goes across time and across people, you need to apply that decision consistently, not necessarily equally, but consistently. So if it's a decision around how work gets allocated, who gets what overtime shifts, there's got to be a rationale between how that decision is made, and you need to apply that consistently across the different people and events. And the last thing is that allow an opportunity or an option to appeal. So if I didn't get the promotion, but we all had a chance, I should have the option to be able to talk back with manager, not to necessarily change the decision, but maybe provide some more information, but also to get a sense of, okay, where was I strong and where do I still need to develop? So having that option to appeal in some cases is also a huge element to procedural justice. Now, if you can do these things, you're going to increase the chances that you're improve the procedural justice in your work and organization. And so what do you get when you improve procedural justice? Well, you get all kinds of good things. So if you've improved procedural justice, that also tends to lead toward better work performance and team performance. So people do the job better. Customer service satisfaction improves. You have an increase in trust in the supervisor and a trust in the organization. You feel like you're going to get a fair shot. Better job satisfaction, better organizational commitment, and an increase in what's called citizenship behavior. So in all of our jobs, we've got things that we're required to do. But there's also things that we could do, but we don't have to. So volunteering, helping people out, we call them discretionary. It's discretionary effort. also called citizenship behaviors. It shows that you're a good citizen. You're trying to make the work environment better. So you get an increase in that when you've got good procedural justice. Also, if you've increased procedural justice, you also see a decrease in some negative aspects. One is withdrawal. So, you have engagement on one side of the continuum. On the other side is when people start to pull out and be disengaged. And so if you had somebody that used to engage a lot in these citizenship behaviors, those are some of the first things to go. And then you notice that they're not really volunteering anymore. They're not putting their hand up. They're sort of sticking to their own job. Then they're starting the beginning stages of withdrawal. Also, it tends to show up in people being late more often, sometimes being absent, et cetera. Even further are the counterproductive work behaviors. So not just things like theft or property damage, but other things like starting rumors, disparaging talk about other people behind their backs, that kind of stuff that just doesn't add to the team environment. Intent to quit is another thing that also reduces when you've got good procedural justice. So turnover is a little tough to measure because, yes, we can tell when people leave the organization, but it's also driven by all sorts of other economic factors that are outside of the organization's control. But when researchers ask people in the job saying, hey, if you had an offer for the same pay, same benefits, doing the same thing with a different company, would you go? That's called intent to quit. And it becomes a really good predictor of actual turnover when the economics are more favorable. And so when you have high procedural justice, you tend to have less people saying like, yeah, I'll leave in a heartbeat as soon as I get something with the same pay or benefits and same job. Okay. Because that's an indictment of, the current organizational culture. And of course, burnout reduces as well. So you get all kinds of good things and you get a reduction in all kinds of bad things when you're able to impact procedural justice in the organization. Okay, so I've been yammering on for a bit. Let's ask how procedural justice looks in your own organization. So we're going to open up a poll and we want you to rate how procedural justice is in your own function or organization from 5, really strong. We can probably lead this webinar and then I'll turn the reins over to you, to 1, it's a real problem and causing issues. So Pam?
All right. Take a minute to load here. Should be launched.
Got some people that are kind of in the middle, people that are doing okay. Give a second for other responses. Oh, somebody that's they're struggling for the consistency. Okay, so kind of clustered in the middle. Nobody's in really bad shape and nobody's really got it nailed necessarily. So like to either in the chat or Q&A, or if you want to raise your hand, I like to anybody that marked a 2 or a 3, feel free to raise your hand and Pam will take you off mute, or if you don't want to come off mute, we can put your answer in the chat or Q&A. Like what do you think are some of the challenges you've got with procedural justice in your organization right now? What are some of the things that make you mark it as a 2 or a 3? Jasmine. Right. Hi, Jasmine.
Let me get Jasmine off. Here we go. All right, Jasmine, you should be off mic, or should be on mic now.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, Mike. I think I rated my team at a 2 because I for one, for sure, the concept of procedural justice is very new to them. And
Okay.
without even using a fancy word for it, just getting them to understand that, like, it matters if this process is fair. It matters if you understand it.
Mhm.
I think I think we also have a little bit of a challenge just because there are a lot of people who have been doing their job for years. I mean,
Mm.
for almost as long as I have been alive, and
Oh my gosh.
a lot of times people like to rely on things that work, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. And so, considering that we could look at people and processes differently, um, it's not even that they don't care. It's just it seems unnecessary. A lot of people view it as unnecessary. So I think the challenge is just kind of helping people understand why it matters, and that it does matter, and that whether they believe it or not, they are contributing to kind of the culture of how we look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about people that have been around for a long time. I've seen that sometimes in leadership where you have someone that's been a leader for a long time and they came up in a very command and control. Like way back in my youth, I was in the Marines, and there were some people that were definitely command and control. And it's I tell you and you do, and I don't need to tell you why. And but we're going to talk about why it's important to get to the why on those as well. So excellent. Thank you very much for jumping in. Was
And it
there
looks like
also
we
a
have one
chat?
in chat. Yes. Anthony said how promotions are determined.
That's a huge one. And sometimes the challenge with that is that it's a systems issue. And so sometimes it's hard to kind of change the HR system that's involved. But we're going to give you some practical strategies that you can do, even if the system isn't changing, where you can try to improve procedural justice when you have little control over the systems element of it. Thank you very much. Excellent. So very good discussion. Appreciate that. Um, so we've talked about procedural justice, and we're going to come back to this in a little bit in a second. Let's turn over to familiarity, or what the researchers call leader-member exchange. By the way, I love this quote from Teddy Roosevelt. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Very important. So when researchers first start looking at leadership, and honestly, the study or discussion of leadership goes back thousands of years, back to the philosophers, and it tended to focus on traits, decisive, charismatic, things like that. But in leader-member exchange, the research focused less on the traits and more on that dynamic, that relationship between the supervisor and their direct reports. So that's really what leader-member exchange is. The quality of that relationship between the leaders, each of the followers and subordinates. So you don't have to be charismatic, you don't have to be an expert, you don't have to be any of these other things that people often talked about with leadership. You just have to work on the quality of that relationship. And we're going to talk about what that entails. What does that mean? 4 key elements to this. The first one is that you're good at clarifying the role as a supervisor, and many of these 4 that we're going to talk about, they're two-way streets, so it's a back and forth kind of thing. So with my boss, I know exactly what is expected of me on the job and what good looks like. So it's very clear to me as a worker. Critical to this is that that's from my perspective. Sometimes when we're talking about clarifying expectations, the leader says, yeah, I clarified. I told them what needs to be done and then let them go. Well, that isn't validating exactly whether it was clear from the perspective of the worker. And that's the key here too. So in addition to clarifying expectations, the other element of this is that I know where I stand with my boss. And so I'm getting feedback regularly, not just on the things I'm doing well, but areas where I can improve. So it's the clear expectations, the job, and what good looks like, but then also feedback so I know am I hitting the target or not. So that's clarifies role. The second one is solves problems. So in high leader-member exchange organizations, the boss has a very good understanding of the job I'm doing and the task and the kinds of problems that I run into, and then works with me collaboratively to try to solve those problems. And so that collaborative work on solving problems, that depends a little bit on kind of where I am in my own development. If there's somebody that's very young and or inexperienced, new into the job, there's going to be a little bit more hands-on, and maybe at that point the boss or the leader is going to be helping solve problems and taking more active role in that as they mentor them toward being able to solve problems on their own. And then as you go up the chain or up the continuum to more experienced and workers, then that solving problems is even more collaborative. And a lot of times it's more, bouncing ideas off each other or working through how to solve the problem from an area of mutual respect and credibility. But that's a huge amount of it. And it could be, you're not taking over, but you're helping with resources, you're helping with problem solving, you're helping with ideas, and or you may be putting in touch with other people that can help with those sorts of things. But you're involved in solving problems and removing obstacles. The third element to leader-member exchange is trust. And so, and again, this is a two-way street. My boss trusts me to get the job done, and so therefore is not a micromanager or a nano manager. But also, I trust my boss to have my back if something goes wrong and to help me when necessary, which kind of comes back to the solves problem. So my boss and I, we worked out how to solve this particularly tricky problem. And then something goes wrong. My boss isn't going like, well, he did it. He's not leaving me hanging out to dry. He's got my back and he's there and standing up for me. And so that's a huge element. But again, that's a two-way street. And then the last thing is my leader understands that getting better at my job is good for me and good for the organization. And for me, it helps me put me in better position to get promoted and move up and feel better about the job I'm doing. But also, it's good for the organization. And so they invest time. They understand that part of their role as a leader is to coach and mentor the people underneath them. And this also provides a framing around that feedback that we talked about in the clarifies roles section. So it's a different feeling when you're getting feedback from improvement, where your boss is telling you, giving you a criticism or something that needs to be better. It's different when the boss is side by side and I know that he or she is invested in me getting better, and it's coming from a different place than when the only time I see my boss is when they're out there looking for something I'm doing wrong. That's a little bit different. So that develops, if you're invested in the development and they know that, then they receive that criticism or that guidance feedback much better. So those are the key elements of leader-member exchange. Let's talk more about what you get with that. So similar to procedural justice, there are all sorts of positive things that happen when you're able to improve that relationship between you and your direct reports. Obviously, performance improves. They're much clearer about what's expected of me. They're getting feedback. They understand, how close are they. They're more engaged because you have this collaborative relationship with them about how to solve problems. So they're now invested and they're involved. Obviously, satisfaction with the supervisor. They get along. You know what's expected of you. Role clarity, obviously. Job satisfaction, organizational commitment. Job satisfaction often comes when you're in a good environment, but you also feel like you're having success, you're doing well, or you're getting better. Organizational commitment means, hey, I'm in a good environment. Like I like working here, and then you're more likely to help others. So when your boss is mentoring you and developing you, it often results in you then doing the same thing as less experienced employees come into the team. You kind of pay it forward a little bit. And of course, you get less of some of those negative aspects, the counterproductive work behaviors, intent to quit, turnover, and those sorts of things. Okay. So we're going to do the same kind of poll, but for leader-member exchange. I'd like to ask you, think about your work environment, your team, your function, and rate how How are you doing on leader member exchange? From 5, hey, we're doing great, to 1, hey, this is a problem. I think the poll is open now. Ooh, got some people that are strong. That's good. Couple people that are in the 3, we do some things well. No, we're in that 3 or 4 area, which is good. I mean, could be worse, right? Okay. We've got folks in the 4s. I'll go in the other direction. So the people that indicated a 4, what are the things that your leader does that makes you rank it a 4 on leader member exchange? What are some of the specific things that leader does? Either raise your hand and we'll take you off mute, or put it in the chat or Q&A. Don't be shy. Well, I'll talk about myself then, since nobody's people are reluctant to. One of the things my boss does is that she's very good about being clear about where we stand on various projects. Okay, this is where we are. This is what's coming next, and so it's clear to me what's happening, what she needs from me, and what's next. And so that kind of clarity makes it easier for me to do my job, and it makes it easier for me to perform. Any other comments? Otherwise, we'll close this poll. Okay. All right. So from here, we've talked about both procedural justice and leader member exchange, particularly how they relate to lots of aspects of strong organizational functioning. But what about safety? You haven't talked about safety. Well, we're going to get to that. So these things, both fairness and familiarity, work hand in hand to improve safety in the organization. So let me tell you what that means. So when employees feel like the rules are applied consistently and they're transparent and you have an opportunity for input, then employees are more likely to follow safety procedures, and they're more likely to report hazards and near misses and unsafe conditions. And you kind of think back to that poor example where so I'm on a team with 6 people, and but I get all the junky jobs, and Joe gets all the good jobs, and he gets the overtime anytime he wants because he goes golfing with the boss every weekend. And so that's not only going to impact my perception of my supervisor, my boss, but it's also going to impact my perceptions of Joe. And so if I then see Joe, working at risk, he's on a ladder, but he's not tied off, and he's doing some risky things, how likely am I to intervene with Joe? I could just be like, he can handle himself, and be less likely to intervene when procedural justice is low. And in doing this, these evaluations across numbers of several sites within the same organization or across many organizations, what you see is that when procedural justice is low, you also see the impact on team behaviors happening the same way. Low procedural justice, and the team isn't as connected, as tight as they should be, and so they're less likely to kind of point things out to each other. Same thing with leader member exchange. When people feel respected and valued, they're more likely to commit to shared safety goals. They're going to be receptive to feedback. And they're also, I talked about in both of those, you're more likely to get that discretionary effort. So if there's a new initiative, okay, we're now going to focus on SIF precursors. We want you looking out for these sorts of controls, or we're now going to institute, a three-way communication for these really risky tasks. And instead of making them a one-person operation, we're going to put you on a crew of 2 or 3 to do this job because it's so concerning. Then you're more likely to be engaged and be on board with the organization because they feel like they have your best interests at heart. And so these things go hand in hand with improvements in safety. And there's a lot of data over the years that see that when those things improve, you also see reductions in injuries and improvements and all sorts of other positive safety behaviors. Okay. So all good, but what are some practical things I can do today that'll help me help improve both procedural justice and leader-member exchange? We've already talked about a couple things, but I want to kind of get into more detail here. The first thing is being open and transparent, both good news and bad news. And, people can tell if the supervisor or manager is hiding something. And now there are situations, there's a big organizational change coming, or they're working through some other merger or something, where they can't, they're bound from discussing the elements of those discussions. And so that's the reality. However, the good supervisors and leaders are still even open with what they can't tell you. It's like, yes, I'm going to these meetings. I can't tell you what we're discussing, and I can't tell you, and no decisions have been made. But as soon as there is one, you'll be the first to know, and I'm going to be open with you the whole step of the way, every step of the way. So being open and transparent makes a big difference. Involving the workforce as much as possible in decisions. So decisions are a continuum. It goes from like, I'm making a decision all by myself with no input from anybody, to the team is making the entire decision with no input from anybody. So the team's got full empowerment to make that decision. And then there's a continuum in between, where there's input and then there's other things. So to the extent possible, as it relates to the work and to the workers, their schedules, who does what jobs, et cetera, you want to try to involve them as much as possible. You want to push that down to that continuum as much as possible, and keep them involved. If it is something that is a little bit higher that you have to make the decision, and maybe you get some input, but you're making a decision on your own, be very open. This is back to the first one. Be open with how the decision is going to be made, so people understand where they are and how it affects them. So again, involving workforce in those decisions the extent you can. Third one is explain the why. So we hit 2 years old. If you've got a 2-year-old at home, this intimately. They start asking why this, why that, and it never ends, ever. Well, that's human nature, and we don't stop asking why. Until we're pushing up daisies. So if your folks are asking you, okay, why are we doing this way? That's just human nature. Don't fight back about that. Tell them the why, tell them the rationale, and that's actually a sign of respect, and you're more likely to get their agreement and involvement. They don't have to agree that rationale is a good one, but they appreciate that you're telling them the rationale and the why. 80% of life, and probably a higher percentage of leadership, is just showing up. And that's the case here. So it's hard to lead if you don't have an understanding of the challenges that your folks are wrestling with. And that means you have to get out there, you have to be present, and you have to be talking to them and have a good understanding of what's going on, and showing up. And that's a huge part. And unfortunately, the work environment today, we've got, phones and emails and calls. We've got things that pull us away from the floor, pull us away from the field. And I understand that that's a reality, but you need to figure out ways that you can push those to the side and get out there and get with your people, because it makes a big difference. Set clear expectations. We've talked about this a bit. I just want to reiterate that it's not the expectation from your point of view as the boss, it's the expectations from the worker's point of view. So you have to take that extra step and validate, verify that they understand it the way you want them to understand it. So that whether it's repeat it back to me or explain to me what the goal is and what good looks like and things like that. And you've got to give good feedback. So once they know what the job is, they've got to know how close they are to success. And so that's positive and constructive feedback. It's not and it's personalized. So it's not just, everybody's above average or good job, everyone. It's specific to what the person's doing and the impact it's having, both positive and constructive. And then recognize and support. One of the things with leadership is that leaders get identified and promoted often because they're really good at, going out to the manufacturing operations and seeing the problems and then taking action to solve those problems. So they're very good at kind of honing their attention toward problems. The challenge with that, and that works fine for equipment, it works great for processes. For people, it's a little bit different. If the only time I see my boss is when she's telling me things I'm doing wrong, that tends to sink my morale. I kind of get a little down, So you've got to change your attention when you're thinking about people, so that you're purposefully looking for things that are going well and that you're recognizing that. And then supporting them. And we talked about support a bit, like resources, help, somebody to talk to about, all sorts of ways support shows up. And then getting to know your workers on a personal level. And so we bring our whole selves to work, so get to know, what are their interests, what are their hobbies, what do they really like about their job, what's super frustrating to them, what are their ambitions. I'll talk about why this is so important. This is important not just to sort of build a better relationship, but it's also minimizes one of the downsides or one of the things you want to avoid. So, but these are some really practical things you can get started with today. And there are also some pitfalls we want you to avoid. So these are in some ways the opposite of the ones we just talked about, but I want to touch on playing favorites for a second. It sounds really obvious. Okay, I'm not playing favorites. But we're not always a great judge of that. Partly because our human nature is that we immediately have an affinity for people in our work area that have similarities to us. And so, I'll give you an example. So I live in Pittsburgh. I've lived in Pittsburgh for almost the last 30 years, but I'm not a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. I am a Cincinnati Bengals fan, arch rival. And so if I'm walking around the street and I see somebody in a Bengals jersey, knowing that we're both in enemy territory, and I give them a little hooday, there's an immediate connection because we found something we both are aligned with, and there's an immediate liking and affinity there. And so, if you've got 10 folks that are reporting to you, there's naturally going to be people that you have more connection to, more affinity with. And so one of the reasons why it's so important for you to get to know everybody on your team from a personal level is that part of the thing is you're looking for those other things about that person, their background, where they came from, that you've got a connection to, that you've got an affinity for. And when you're doing that across all of the folks in your thing, then you're less likely to play favorites. When you haven't done that, you're naturally going to go, even without any intent, you're naturally going to lean on the folks that you have most in common with. It's just human nature. So playing favorites sounds pretty straightforward, but you want to try to there's more to that. And so there's elements around learning the people and getting to know them. And this kind of sounds like all soft, this is soft stuff, psychology stuff, but kind of going back to my time in the Marines, the Marine Corps has 11 leadership principles that get kind of hammered into you from day one. And the third leadership principle is know your Marines and look out for their welfare. And recognizing early on that a critical element of leading in combat is understanding your folks and then looking out for them. And that's critical. What resonated with you? What challenges do you face in applying these? Feel free to either raise your hand and we'll take you off mute, or put your question in chat or a Q&A.
We did have someone submit a question early on about asking how much time should a supervisor plan to spend with their team?
Exactly 3.5 minutes per person. There's no real specific amount of time per person. The things I want you to think about with that are, because it's also going to vary depending on your situation. We've had folks where I'm supervising 10 people, but they're scattered across the country. Or I'm supervising 5 and they are all outside my cubicle, right there, working in cubicles next to them. So, the circumstances matter a lot. The key piece is, do you have a understanding of the challenges that they have in their job, the problems they're facing on a day-to-day basis? Do you feel like they know they can come to you? Do they have clear expectations for what good looks like? And do you have opportunities to give them feedback? And so if you're able to kind of engage with them enough, and you have a pretty good understanding of their whole person, what are their interests, what are their hobbies, what are their ambitions, what do they like about their job, where they're frustrated, all of those things. If you've kind of been able to get those, then probably you're spending enough time with them. But it's also a chance to ask them what do they need? What do they need more from you? So unfortunately, there's no answer other than, can you answer those questions around providing feedback, understand their problems, understand, how they operate, their motivations, and are there to help them solve problems? Then I'd say you're there.
We have a question here from Anthony. How does one deal with a loner in a team that works well?
Yeah, so that's part of the elements that we talked about really at the end. So getting to know folks, the folks on your team that are generally extroverts, you're probably not going to have to do a whole lot because they're going to be coming to you. They're going to be banging your door down. But it's the folks that are quieter, that are more introverted. You really want to get to know them, get to know what gets them up in the morning, get to know what they really enjoy about it, get to know what's frustrating to them. Because sometimes they are extremely thoughtful about the problems in the organization, and it's a gold mine of ideas. But maybe they're going to be more likely to kind of sit on their hands in a group meeting. So that's where those one-on-ones engagement can really help. The other piece too is that got to be clear about, do they understand the expectations? And if you're doing a lot of team decision making where the team has input and you've discovered that this person's got a lot of great ideas, but they're sitting on them, it's not unheard of that you can make that part of the expectations for the job. Is I know it's uncomfortable for you, but part of our expectations when we're in a group together, I need to hear ideas. And I know that's maybe not your nature, not where you feel comfortable with, but we want to hear them. And I may end up calling on you because I know you've always got great ideas. So you can make that part of the expectations for the job too. To summarize, these are like critical elements to a supervisor's success. And it's really important to kind of help make sure you understand, like, where are you in your team and what actions you're taking to help improve procedural justice and leader-member exchange. Here at Cross Bell, we've had great success helping organizations and individual leaders improve in these areas. So give us a call if you're needing help Also, if you just want to get a sense of where you stand on these, we've got a wonderful assessment, and we've done that for hundreds of organizations to help them get a sense of where they stand on procedural justice, where they stand on leader-member exchange, and where are the differences across the various departments in the organization. That's usually a really excellent place to start. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and have a great day.